You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron. Now here's your host, Ethan Haristadoulou.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome back to the Greeks Gridiron, and a happy Wednesday to you all. I am Ethan Haristadoulou, and today, as we continue to work our way through season previews, showing love to those teams that finished at the bottom of the NFL last season, today, we're going to dive in and take a look at the New York Giants, who selected number 3 overall in this year's draft, a team that was able to find themselves a quarterback for the interim, a quarterback of the future, get themselves a premier edge rusher, and had an overall, I would personally say, a pretty successful offseason for a GM and head coach that feel like they're a bit on the hot seat going into this season here. So there's a lot to dive into, a lot to get into. As always, I invite you all to comment down below. Let me hear from you all, whether you're a Giants fan, someone within the division who roots for another team, or just a lover of the NFL like myself. Let me hear from you all. What are your thoughts, expectations, things you're looking forward to seeing from the Giants this year? Maybe highlighting some things that I don't discuss here. These are not meant to be very long discussions. It's just kind of things that I'm looking forward to seeing or just anticipating playing out as we go through this 2025 season. So we'll start with the first place, and that for me is actually on the defensive side of the football. While there's a lot to like about the offense this year and a lot to be excited about, we got to start with those edge rushers, and it all starts with the addition of Abdul Carter in my eyes here, because I think you are in line in New York for a potential premier group of edge rushers if all goes well, if everyone stays healthy, and performs to the level that I believe all of these players are capable of. Now, Abdul Carter obviously becoming a New York Giant, this was something that, in my personal opinion, leading into the draft, I was rooting for, and I honestly thought was going to happen because yes, the quarterback conversation was loud, but what the Giants ended up doing in the draft was kind of where my head was at for a while with them, except I wasn't expecting them to go after Jaxson Dart. I won't sit here and say I tried calling that or anything by any means, but I was kind of in the camp of, you have the opportunity of adding a guy like an Abdul Carter and then maybe jumping back up into the back part of the first round and netting yourself a starting quarterback for the future. And that's just what the Giants did. So to say that I was thrilled that the Giants were able to A, get Abdul Carter, but B, also get a quarterback for the future is kind of like understating it. I was pumped to see how that all played itself out. And I mean, at this point right now, with the way the preseason has already played out for Jaxson Dart, like I think there's a lot to be excited about on that side of the ball. But with this addition of Abdul Carter to what is already a fairly stacked room, you obviously have Brian Burns, who has been incredible throughout the duration of his career from his first season in New York, going through his entirety of the entirety of the time he spent in Carolina. Tripping over my tongue there. But I've got to say, and then on top of that, the Kayvon Thibodeau factor as well. Like, there is a lot to like about this group. Now, when you look at Brian Burns last season, first year in the system, mind you, 8.5 sacks, pretty strong number there, 17 tackles for loss. Kayvon Thibodeau through the 2024 season, 5.5 sacks, modest 5.5 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, also 5 games missed last season as well. And then Abdul Carter coming out of Penn State, his 2024 season, 12 sacks, 24 tackles for loss, which led the FBS. You have the potential of having a literal 3-headed monster coming off the edges here. And I also think it's important to add, it's not just those 3 guys. You have yourself Chauncey Golston as well, a guy you picked up during the offseason, coming from Dallas, coming off a career year in which he got the opportunity to start 13 games, racking up 5.5 sacks himself. You've got a trio to really like, plus a guy who got looks as a starter last season, looked pretty solid, but I think will really benefit from working in a rotational role behind these 3 guys in whatever order they're kind of working themselves through. I think the big, deciding factor on just how good this whole group of 3 could be really comes down to Kayvon Thibodeau's health and how the snaps are kind of divvied up amongst the 3. Like, the way I see it, Brian Burns is obviously going to be a de facto starter. He's going to be out there a vast majority of the time for this Giants team, and how things ultimately split between Abdul Carter and Kayvon Thibodeau remain to be seen. Regardless of who gets to start week 1, I'm thinking more just overall duration of the entirety of the season, because what starts off in week 1 is not always necessarily true come week 18 of the season. So I'll be curious how health comes into play, how the snaps get divvied up between those 2, but you have a legit opportunity where you are just constantly throwing haymakers at offensive lines from either the left or the right side with a legit trio of guys, plus a Chauncey Golston, who will be great coming in relief for whoever's not being relieved by one of the other guys. This could be one of the NFL's deepest edge rushing groups going into this season. And they were a really good group last year. And again, Kayvon Thibodeau was not healthy for the entirety of the season. If he can stay healthy in a role where maybe he doesn't have to play as much, whether he's playing second fiddle to Abdul Carter, or if Abdul Carter's just the guy that's coming in to give him a little bit more relief than Kayvon Thibodeau has had in years past before going down with injuries, there's a lot to like about this group, and I think is going to be a big reason why this defense in New York is going to capture even more of the magic we saw from them last year, because the Giants defense was actually a pretty good unit, all things considered. Obviously, the offense did not help them out last season, and I think with a more competent offense on the other side of the ball, this Giants defense could look really good during this 2025 season. And that can kind of just walk us right into my next discussion, and that is, of course, the quarterback conversation. We cannot talk New York Giants and not discuss what is going to ultimately happen between Week 1 and Week 18 and potentially further down the line for the New York Giants at the quarterback spot. Now, the way it seems as an outsider looking in, Jaxson Dart seems to have already won the hearts of the New York Giants fan base, and that always presents an interesting situation when the incumbent rookie comes in and he's able to win over the fans immediately, but you went into the offseason and nabbed yourself a starting quarterback, and for what it's worth, Brian Daboll has made it clear Russell Wilson is the guy for Week 1, a few times at that, and I don't think that's changing between now and then. I've got to say, I am very interested in seeing how this all plays out. And it's not as simple as just like, because Russell Wilson might ultimately flame out and then Jaxson Dart's going to get the opportunity. But there's kind of a lot of nuance to this whole situation beyond just the quarterback spot. And I kind of alluded to it earlier between Brian Daboll's job security and, of course, Joe Schoen's job security. There is a lot to really kind of dissect, and on top of that, there's a lot of consequence that can come from this QB situation and how it sort of plays itself out. Now, when Russell Wilson was first initially brought into New York, I was kind of in the camp of, okay, this makes sense. You're bringing in a guy, former Super Bowl champion, who coming out of this Steelers situation he had last season, it did not necessarily end well. Those last 5 games were really rough for the Pittsburgh Steelers offense altogether, just to put it simply. But the year, even before that year prior, even like that early part of the season when he first got in coming off that calf injury, things actually looked pretty good. And then the wheels just kind of fell off that last month and some change. But then going back to his final season in Denver, clearly, he and Sean Payton were not on the same page, but in spite of that, Russell Wilson, at least statistically, still had a good season. He went 7-8 as a starter for the Broncos to finish that year off. But overall, Russell Wilson, at least numbers-wise, showed he was still capable of leading an offense in the NFL, and I kind of feel like that's still true. There was maybe a little bit more going on in Pittsburgh than some people realize, and I think that just has to do with how good of a control Mike Tomlin has over Pittsburgh, because we see a lot of people end up leaving Pittsburgh, and we get to see the true just headache that was actually happening in Pittsburgh that doesn't really come to light until those players leave. And I'm semi-alluding to maybe the George Pickens situation and just some other things that maybe we don't yet know about that we could see pop up down the line. But I do think that bringing in Russell Wilson, it put me in the position of, all right, this is a GM and a head coach who feel that they can bring in a veteran like this and at least win more football games than you did last year to try to save your job. And I think if you bring in Russell Wilson and you're flirting with 8 or 9 wins this season, this is prior to the knowledge of a drafted quarterback. I'm thinking you could potentially save your job there, but you have to have 8, 9 wins a minimum. And even then, you probably want to flirt with 10 and nearly making the playoffs, or just missing, where you can turn to ownership and go, see, look what happens when we have good quarterback play. Now, ultimately, you draft a quarterback. That kind of complicates the situation a little bit further now, because you get put in a situation where you end up facing a handful of questions. The big questions that you're being faced with, of course, how long of a leash does Russell Wilson get if things do go sideways? This is kind of a little bit of a get-out-of-jail-free card for the Giants now, because you can always go to ownership and say, well, this is the reason we drafted Jaxson Dart, because we liked Russell Wilson. We weren't necessarily 100% sure it would work. This is why we got the rookie. Then you, of course, how long do you hold on to Russell Wilson as your starter before you ultimately decide to send in Jaxson Dart? How does the determination of when Jaxson Dart should be ready to take things over comes into play? Then you have to ask, well, how much do you hold the Russell Wilson failure, if that's the route things go, do you hold against both your GM and your head coach if you are the Maras in this situation here? And then if Jaxson Dart does come in at some point this season as the starter and finishes the year as the starter, what do you need to see from this team, and maybe more so specifically the offense than anything else, for you to feel like, okay, we don't need to move on from Daboll and Shane this offseason. Things looked good at the tail end of the season. Yeah, maybe it was a little bit ugly getting there, but Jaxson Dart showed promise. He showed that he could handle this thing, and if, with a full offseason under his belt going into year number 2, maybe we can expect things to get even better. Like, there is a lot that goes into this now because of this 2-quarterback situation. Ultimately, for me, I feel like for the best case scenario for both Brian Daboll and Joe Shane to maybe secure their jobs for at least another season while they ride this hot seat as they do going into this year, I think if the Russell Wilson experiment fails, it needs to be it can't be super ugly. Like, it can't be a disaster. You're hoping for like really tight one-possession losses where maybe just Russell Wilson's just quite not getting you over the hump there. And then Jaxson Dart needs to come in. Maybe he sparks the offense. You win. I honestly think if you bring in Jaxson Dart and if he gets you 5 or 6 wins and they look good and maybe you're in it in 2 or 3 other losses where you go, another year under his belt where he's a little bit more confident in the system, those losses could have been wins kind of deal, you're A-okay. Like 5 or 6 wins with Jaxson Dart as your quarterback is not a bad thing, especially if you hit that 6-win mark. That's already doubling your win total from the season prior. Maybe it's not as big of a jump as you want, but I'm trying to set like realistic and fair expectations. You obviously want playoffs or nothing in the NFL at minimum, and obviously Super Bowl. But, like, let's be realistic here. A 3-win team trying to turn things around that quickly, it just doesn't happen that often. It does every now and again. It's usually one specific team. And what are the odds out of the 12 to 16 teams that were on the back side or the back half of the NFL, do they actually get to turn things around the way a team like the Commanders or the Texans most recently have been able to do in a singular offseason? I think you need the Russell Wilson experiment to go bad, but not too bad. And you need Jaxson Dart to win you a handful of football games, and you need to be in it till the very end and lose ultimately, and at least see some good from Jaxson Dart in those losses for your jobs to be safe. So like the quarterback situation in New York is fascinating to me in my eyes. And then the last thing that I'm looking at here, and it's very easy to get caught up with like maybe like wide receiver room, maybe something else like the secondary. But for me, I'm really interested in seeing how the running back room plays itself out in New York. And the reason for that is I have a ton of respect for what Tyrone Tracy did last season. This is a group of guys that it doesn't necessarily jump off the page when you read the list, but if you know what Tyrone Tracy was able to do last season behind a not-so-great offensive line and in a quarterback situation that was far from perfect, racking up over 1,100 total yards from scrimmage, averaging nearly 5 yards per touch in general, and then, of course, 6 touchdowns to add along with all of that, he stepped in and filled what was a gaping hole left by Saquon Barkley when he departed. And I think for him to step in, 1,100 total yards from scrimmage, showed he could run with the football, showed he could catch out of the backfield as well. You got a lot more than I think anyone could have asked for out of Tyrone Tracy. You add in the addition of Cam Scatabo, who was coming out of Arizona State off of a wild season last year where I believe he finished 5th in Heisman voting, 2,300 total yards from scrimmage, averaged nearly 7 yards per touch, and 24 total touchdowns. I'm not going to sit here and act like that is just going to completely translate one-to-one to the NFL. That's not what I'm saying here, but you see what he can do when things are going really well for him, and he produced all the way to the very end of last season, coming into a situation where he doesn't have to be the guy. He can be a complement, and where he has like a overtly physical style of running with the football. It complements what Tyrone Tracy is able to do. You have yourself a really intriguing backfield. And of course you have like, I don't want to sit here and act like Devin Singletary is not on the roster as well. Obviously a solid number 3 veteran option here, but for me, I'm more interested in seeing if maybe Turbo Miller sneaks his way onto the roster this year. I'm glad to see that the Giants were able to keep him after going through waivers and being able to bring him onto the practice squad. Somebody who literally, his name, Turbo Miller, suits him perfectly with the play speed that he has, looking like a literal rocket with the ball in his hands. Like, I'm more interested in that than I am seeing what Devin Singletary could do. And I also feel like running back these days is just, it's a young man's game. You want those fresh legs that are either coming out of college or maybe a year or two at most removed from college. And you can see that in the way the Giants backfield is currently set up. They kind of acknowledge that, I'm assuming, as well. Obviously, you have the exceptions to that. Don't get me wrong. The Derrick Henrys of the world, the Saquon Barkleys of the world. But there's only two of those guys, and they're each one of one in their own respect. So I like what this running back room presents on paper, and behind some better offensive line play and behind more competent quarterback play, whether it's coming from Russell Wilson or if it's coming from your rookie quarterback in Jaxson Dart, and, we're not seeing errant turnovers and just poor mistakes putting you in bad positions where you can't run the football as much or you can't take advantage of your backfield. This is one of those sleeper groups of guys that I think could be pretty exciting as the season rolls along, as long as things are going well and falling in their favor. If they're not, I think Tyrone Tracy at least proved himself that he can still be a reliable option, even if things are not going perfectly. And Cam Scatabo, just from a 1,000-yard view with his play style and the hustle that he plays with, I've got to say, I would feel like he potentially fits that bill as well. Remains to be seen, but I'm looking forward to finding out. That is for damn sure. So that's just kind of what I'm looking at as far as the Giants go this season. If I was to lay out a fair expectation for this team as far as like win total looks, this is a team that finished 3-14 last season, and I really feel like if everything goes right, 8 to 9 wins is possible. They're in a tough division. A lot of question marks surrounding what the Cowboys might look like, but you have the Super Bowl champion defending, obviously, in the Philadelphia Eagles. You have a team that made it all the way to the NFC Championship in the Washington Commanders. It's not easy pickings for this team, and getting through their division alone is going to be a bit of a tough one to fight through, but you're working with a fourth-place schedule in New York. You're in a really good spot in my eyes right now with the way things have kind of shaped up this offseason. I think the Giants could be one of those teams that made the right upgrades, takes advantage of a fourth-place schedule kind of deal, and maybe wins a game or two that people didn't really expect them to. And again, 8 to 9 wins is like best-case scenario. If you wanted to maybe take a win or two away from that and say something along the lines of like 6-7 wins, something in that ballpark, I could definitely have that conversation as well. But I do feel like the Giants might be in, especially with the defense, and me being maybe a little bit higher on them than some other people that aren't Giants fans, I could see them maybe stealing a game or two that way. So let me know whether you're a Giants fan or not. Comment section down below. Thoughts, opinions. What are you looking forward to from the New York Giants themselves? What do you think they're going to get done this year? Highs, lows, anything I didn't touch on. Would love to hear what you all think. But as always, if you made it to the end, I greatly appreciate it, and I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.